Hi everyone, today I wanted to give you my first impressions on the Panasonic Lumix S5. And I recently purchased this camera for my professional videography work and property videos, but it's really a significant purchase for me because I've been an Olympus Micro Four Thirds shooter for almost 5 years now. And this is really the first full-frame camera that's gotten my attention since I switched from a Nikon D750 full-frame system. And that's because it can do 4K 422 10-bit internally, which no other camera at this price point can do. Add on the fact that it's, a relatively small and compact, lightweight, full-frame system, and it came with like the perfect lens for what I do, the 20-60 kit lens. So for all those reasons, I got this camera. But that said, I don't see me switching to it for my photography, both personally and professionally, for all the reasons that you get into the Micro Four Thirds system to begin with, whether it's your first system or you're switching from another system. The small, compact, lightweight lenses and overall system and the customizability and the features, etc. And that's really what I wanted to talk about, because I could review the Panasonic S5 in a bubble and just talk about how great it is, because it's really a fantastic camera. Tons of features both in the photo side and also on the video side. But I need to compare it. I think it's important to compare it to what I already know, the Olympus E-M1 Mark III. So with that said, let's get started. Modern digital cameras today are very capable, and I think one of the most important things that can help you make that decision of which camera to get comes down to the controls, ergonomics, and handling of the camera. And like I was saying before, you really can't compare a camera in a bubble, right, all by itself. You have to compare it to something else. So I chose the Olympus E-M1 Mark III with the 12-40 Pro kit lens. Or it comes as a kit for about $2,000 right now, and the Panasonic S5 with its 20-60 kit lens comes in around $2,300 at the current prices. But that's not why I chose the M1 Mark III. I really chose the Olympus E-M1 Mark III because I think it's probably the best handling, both in terms of controls and ergonomics, of any camera on the market today. So let's go ahead and do a quick walk around between these two cameras and talk about some of the features and differences. Now, looking at the top of these cameras, you can see right away that the Panasonic is a larger camera, and it's roughly about 200 grams more as seen here with the lenses. But what's significant about that is that the 12-40 Pro, which is a 24-80 equivalent on full frame, is an f2.8 constant. Compared to the Panasonic 20-60, which is an f3.5 to f5.6. So in terms of light gathering or exposure, at 30 millimeters on the Olympus and 60 millimeters on the Panasonic, which is an equivalent focal length, you're getting 2 stops more light into the camera. So that makes this lens really, really small and compact relative to the Panasonic. Now, in terms of depth of field, they're very similar at that point, because f2.8 on a Micro Four Thirds in terms of depth of field is actually 5.6 on a full frame camera. So from that perspective, in terms of background blur and things like that, these lenses are very similar. Now, it's also said that because full frame cameras generally give you about 2 stops better ISO performance, it sort of negates the 2 stops advantage you might get from a Micro Four Thirds lens. But let's just say that for all intents and purposes, these two lenses are pretty much equal. Now, looking at the cameras themselves, the camera body, you can see there's already one thing I like a lot more about the Panasonic here, and that's that it has a dedicated shutter mode dial. On the Olympus here, instead of a shutter mode dial, we have the on-off switch, but we have 2 buttons instead. The top button controlling the shutter mode and flash modes. So you have to push this button, then rotate a dial and look through the back of the live view or through your EVF to change the shutter speed and flash modes. And then the other button here is for your autofocus and metering modes. Again, you would push this button and then adjust one of the dials, front and rear, to adjust the autofocus mode or the metering mode. So it's a little more functional, but I much prefer a physical dial that I can turn and feel exactly what mode I'm in without having to look at the EVF or the live view. And then moving over to the mode dial, these are pretty similar. We got 4 custom modes on the Olympus, and we have 3 on the Panasonic, and then your normal PASM modes, video mode, and then this has some extra S and Q. I guess that's for some slow motion stuff. I've never used that. And then we have simply the video mode here on the Olympus. Now, one more thing the Olympus has is a lock for the mode dial. I never used the lock because I've never accidentally bumped this thing and changed modes, but some people seem to like having a lock button on their mode dial. So just know that the Panasonic does not have one. And then of course the on-off switch here. And then we have our usual front and rear dials here on the Olympus, same as on the Panasonic. And we have our record button, our exposure comp button, ISO button here on the Olympus is down here, kind of in the top corner, whereas on the Panasonic it's here in the middle. And they've also included an additional white balance button. So there's technically more buttons here on the top to give you more direct access to the important controls. But Olympus has a little trick up its sleeve, and that's when we go to the front of the camera. And on the Olympus, we have 2 buttons on the side here, on the front here, and we only have 1 on the Panasonic. The button down here at the bottom is the lens release button. So you can program these 2 buttons, to, one of them to be the white balance. So effectively, you have access to all the buttons on one hand as you do, or the same number of buttons as you do on the Panasonic. Now, going to the side of the camera, we have the same things here. Both of them are dual card slot, UHS 2 on the top, UHS 1 on the bottom. And then this is the jack. This is a 2.5 millimeter jack for remote shutter control. So you can get a wireless remote shutter or a wired remote and just plug it in there. And they are not compatible, unfortunately. So I'm going to have to get a new wireless remote for my Panasonic, because I have one for the Olympus, but I don't have one for my Panasonic. And then let's go to the other side here. And again, it's virtually identical. We have the mic and headphone jack here, and then we have our USB-C and mini or micro HDMI port, and it's the same on the Olympus. USB-C, micro HDMI, and then mic and headphone jack there. And I think Panasonic did a better job with the flaps, because the flaps here are on a little hinge that you can see here, whereas on the Olympus, they're just on a flap or a little rubber tab into the body there. I've never had any of these break ever in the 5 years I've been using Olympus, but this feels a little better. And I like that when you lift it up, it stays open, versus on the Olympus, a lot of times I have to hold this out of the way, like so. So it's almost like a two-handed operation to plug something in. But usually once you plug something in, you're good until you're done. So it's not that big a deal. I don't think it's a deal breaker at all, but I just thought I'd mention that. And then going to the bottom, Panasonic has also done something nice. We have our standard battery doors here, but you'll notice on the Panasonic there's a little rubber stopper here that you can take out. And if you want to use a dummy battery and put it in the camera, you can run the wire for the dummy battery for external power through the little rubber stopper here. So this just comes out. And this allows you to mount the camera into a rig or a cage with the battery door closed, but with a little wire coming out so you can have external power. Whereas on the Olympus, you're going to have to figure out a way to rig your camera with the battery door open if you want to use a dummy battery. But that said, they do have USB-C ports that you can power the camera with externally if you want to here. Now going to the backs of the camera, we'll take a quick look here. Now right away, what I really like about the Panasonic is the directional pad here. You can just go left, right, up, down. Same thing on the Olympus, but as I just showed you, this also rotates. So this really makes it a lot easier to go through the menus. Rather than having to click down, I can just rotate this way or go back up this way, etc. Then click over. It makes it a lot easier. So I really like this. And then we have two buttons here. On the Panasonic, they put the play button over here. On the Olympus, they put the menu button. And I think I prefer the play button up here rather than a menu button like Olympus did. But honestly, I think both companies got it wrong. Nikon got it right. They should make this the trash button, because right now on the Olympus, for example, I'd like to go into the menu actually quite often, and it's always a two-handed operation. I have to go over here, push the menu button, go into the menu, then I can select. And some people like that. I don't. I'd rather have the menu button over here like it is on my E-M1 Mark II and every other Olympus camera I have. On the Panasonic, they put the menu button right here, but if I want to play or review an image, I have to push this button here. So again, it becomes a two-handed operation. So what I've actually done is I reprogrammed the back button focus here, the AF on button, to be the play button instead of back button focus, because I rarely use back button focus. So yeah, honestly, this should be the trash button in my opinion, and make that a two-handed operation, and everything else can be one-handed if they just put everything over here. Just my opinion. Now, another really nice thing they did on the Panasonic is the Q button. So if you push the Q button, you can customize a little menu right here that's touch sensitive. So if I want to change white balance, I just touch that and rotate the dial. Or I can change the metering mode to spot meter very quickly. So I really like that. On the Olympus, what they did is they have a super control panel. So you click OK, and then this is touch sensitive. So if I want to change the ISO, I can select that, then rotate the front dial, or I can rotate the rear dial to scroll through different features, or I can just jump to it by touch, and that works pretty well. But Olympus takes the touch menu, or Panasonic takes the touch menu a little bit further, in that I can select things in here very quickly. So if I want to go to custom menu and format my card, I can do that, or I can go back to the camera menu, go down here to this menu. I'm still not familiar with everything yet, but you can see with a little bit of practice or precision, you can get really good at going through the menu here. I'm still better with the D-pad, but I really like this dial now being here. Rather than on the Olympus, if I push the menu button, I can use the front and rear dials to kind of get around. But that can get a little confusing. I think it's better just to have a single wheel right here, like on the Panasonic. So good job on that. And of course, we have our autofocus joystick here, if I didn't mention that. These are functionally the same. Now, let's talk about some of the ergonomics on the camera. The first thing, and since we're on the back already, is actually the LCD screen here. If you notice on the Olympus, look how big the notch is to open up the LCD screen. This is very, very easy to get your finger in without touching any of the other buttons or accidentally touching the directional pad there. On the Panasonic, you'll notice I really have to dig my finger in there, and I might accidentally rotate the dial getting to it, or push the trash button or whatever. But it's nowhere near as easy as on the Olympus. The other thing you'll notice is look how much wider the hinge is here on the Olympus versus on the Panasonic. When I lift these up just a little bit this way and this way, it's going to be hard to tell on YouTube or wherever you're watching this, but this is pretty solid compared to the Panasonic. You see the wobble there versus on the Olympus, it's a little bit stiffer. So definitely Olympus did a better job with the ergonomics of the LCD screen. And then of course they both flip all the way out and around. No difference there. And you can close it back on itself on both cameras. Now, going to the top, really the big difference here, like they have the 3 buttons here and we have only 2 buttons over here, but on the Olympus, this corner is slanted in a downward direction, maybe 5 or 10 degrees this way, including the shutter button. So the shutter button is, and these buttons are not flat like they are here on the Panasonic. The Panasonic, all 3 buttons here are flat. And then this slopes down this way, just like on the Olympus, but it does not slope down at an angle towards your palm. And I'll show you why that makes a difference when we turn this over onto the side. Now, if you look at the Olympus, you'll notice this nice curve here in the back of the grip. And look how squared off the Panasonic is, right? And then look at the grip themselves. Look how this is nicely curved here. And then look how it has a curve here, but then it squares off and is relatively flat here and here compared to the Olympus. So what happens is when I put my hand on the Olympus and I grip it, it forces my hand to kind of tilt up a little bit towards the shutter button like this, more at an angle. And that in turn, because this is slanted down, my finger naturally rests directly on the shutter button, the very center of my fingertip here, when I grip the camera. And this feels very natural and very good. On the Panasonic, however, you'll notice that my hand does not go at as much of an angle. It's hard to see it, but I can definitely feel it that my hand is not angled towards the shutter button as much. And also the shutter button is completely perpendicular to the grip and it's flat. So when I rest my finger onto the shutter button, it's actually resting on the side of my finger, the shutter button, not directly on the center like it does on the Olympus. And it's something you can get used to very easily, but this just feels better overall. And then looking at the top again, notice how nicely curved this goes in over here. And you'll notice this is pretty squared off until the very end, then it curves in. Whereas this one is already starting to curve from the back all the way to the front. So what this allows me to do is when I put my hand around the camera, my fingers more easily reach the front 2 buttons here on the front of the camera, which is a little hard to see because of the lens there. Whereas on the Panasonic, right away my fingers don't even come close. I have to kind of reach in a little bit to get to them. Because I have short fingers, if you didn't notice. So this button is a little bit, I have to loosen my grip a little bit to get to that button. Just for me ergonomically, this is not quite as good. Also, you'll notice the lug ring here is on the side. So if you do have a strap or a ring, yeah, it comes up, but this part of your hand rubs against the little eyelet here. Whereas on the Olympus, you'll notice they put the eyelet on the top of the camera, not on the side. So your hand doesn't have that problem. And also because your hand tilts up a little bit as well, there's more space right in here away from the eyelet. And then finally, one more thing I forgot to mention on the back is the thumb grip. Now, from this angle, it's not as obvious, but the thumb grip here on the Olympus is much deeper and protrudes quite a bit more than the Panasonic. So when I put my hand in with my thumb here, it's a very, very secure grip with just my thumb and one finger because of how deep this is. Maybe you can see it this way. But you can see that on the Panasonic, it's really just a little nub that sticks out, whereas on the Olympus you can see that it slants in slightly and comes out quite a bit, meaning it slants in towards the front of the camera and then out this way quite a bit. So again, when you hold this camera, the whole ergonomics of this are just feels so much better in your hand. Also, when your finger rests on the shutter button, it feels perfectly in place. Whereas this camera, the best way to describe it, it feels a lot like holding a brick or a block of wood than it does like holding a camera that feels form-fitted to your hand. So that's really all I really can say about the two cameras. There's one other little thing here on the front of the Olympus. This is, I think, a flash sync port. This is really for more legacy type flash systems. So if you use those kinds of old flashes, this will be good for you. But I think most people are using wireless triggers now. And I should also mention on the hot shoes that the entire flash system and triggers, I use Godox flash systems and triggers, but any Olympus compatible flash or trigger will also work on the Panasonic. They share the same identical electrical contacts and programming or whatever, so I don't have to buy a whole new flash system if I want to use a flash with my Panasonic. I can use my existing Olympus flash system, so that was a really nice benefit that I got by going with Panasonic. Now, if I had to give the Panasonic a rating relative to the Olympus, I'd have to give it a B-, with the Olympus being an A+, right? Because, now, don't get me wrong, the Panasonic had some really good points to it. Like, I really like the little scroll wheel integrated into the directional pad. That's awesome. And you know, having a dedicated shutter mode dial, yeah, I've been missing that on my Olympus cameras for 5 years now. But there were also some big misses, right? Like the flip out LCD screen. You know, it should be easy to flip out, and it's really not on the Panasonic compared to the Olympus. And you know, and of course the grip itself, the thumb grip, the fingers. You know, I talked about that at great length. You know, the Olympus just feels like an extension of my hand. It's just form-fitted, and it's just a joy to use. Whereas the Panasonic, like I said, it just feels like holding a block of wood. But as always, you know, it's very subjective. I really recommend, if you can, to actually handle a camera in a store before you make a decision. Because I'm not really trying to recommend one camera system over the other. Hopefully I was able to show you, or what I wanted to show you is really there's more to a camera than just what's on a spec sheet. You know, the sensor size, the megapixels, the ISO performance, the dynamic, all of that stuff. If you're a competent photographer, you're going to take great images with either camera, or just about any camera system, to be honest. So I think it really comes down to the ergonomics of the camera and the handling and the controls. I think that should be one of the most important, if not the most important thing in your camera buying decision. So I hope you found this video helpful. I will be doing some more testing between these two cameras, where I'll actually be taking some pictures and comparing them side by side, you know, looking at sharpness, dynamic range, ISO, all that good stuff. So if you'd like to see those, consider subscribing to the channel. And if you'd like to support the channel, you can buy me a coffee, links down below. But either way, thanks for watching, and hopefully we'll see you again soon.